So my name is Ryan Boyd. I'm a developer advocate at Google, working on Google Apps and the Apps Marketplace. I hope you're all having a really great day today and learning a lot of things. I'm here with Marcos from Just Digital. He is going to be presenting a little bit of their solution using the Google Apps APIs along with me. So let's get started. Here's the agenda. It's very wide. We are planning on talking about a lot of different things with regards to Google Apps, a lot of the different APIs. It's going to be a broad overview of the APIs and the capabilities of Google Apps. It's not going to dive in super detail on any of these. You could probably figure that out from the title and the session abstract, but if not, I'm not going to feel bad if you guys decide to go to another session if you're already deeply familiar with these APIs. So Google Apps. Google Apps is tools for today's user. So think of a lot of the consumer applications that you're used to using on a regular basis. Gmail, Calendar, Docs, Google Talk. All these different types of applications are packaged up and made available for businesses and adding a few of the features that businesses need. And Google Apps is all based off of the web. The web is the enterprise platform. Technologies like HTML5 and JavaScript and CSS allow us to build highly interactive web applications that you can't tell the difference from them versus a desktop application. Gmail was one of the first applications that used a lot of Ajax technology, and it's progressed forward from there, so you have live document editing collaboration that works really well. Google Apps has lots of customers, and it's growing very quickly. There are 30 million active users of Google Apps with 3 million businesses. Over 3,000 new businesses are signing up every single day. And these customers are of all different types of businesses. There are small businesses. There are the mom and pop shops or the small retail stores, going all the way through major enterprises and governments and educational institutions. So we have the apps from Google. We have these communication and collaboration apps that Google has. But how does this hook into together with the things that you guys build? Well, in addition to the apps from Google, back in March, we launched the Apps Marketplace. The Apps Marketplace is basically a store for you to discover and purchase web applications that are well integrated with Google Apps. And for you as developers, it's an opportunity for you to sell applications which are integrated and can have a lot of the same types of integrations that the other applications in the Google Apps Suite have. We also provide points for you to hook in to Google Apps from custom applications. We have platform services with App Engine and APIs that allow you to build custom applications and sell them to customers. And all of this is on top of the same administration layer, same users, same security model, and all that you're comfortable with Google Apps. Now, one of the types of APIs that Google gives you for integrating with Google Apps are the data APIs. And here's a brief overview of the data APIs. They basically allow you to hook into the user's data or the company's data across the web. They're authorized using a protocol called OAuth. We're not going to dive in too deeply into OAuth during this session, but we will talk about that later on if you guys attend my talk. I think it's 2 sessions from now. But OAuth allows you to get secure access to a user's data, like Calendar, like Docs, etc. The data APIs are based off of the Atom publishing protocol. It's an HTTP-based protocol. It uses something called REST, or representational state transfer. Basically allows you to pull objects back and forth from the servers. And it's all based off the Atom data format. You're probably already familiar with Atom from the days of dealing with blog feeds. The Atom format describes some basic syntax that's required, and it's highly extensible, and that's why we've chosen to use it to build APIs for things like Google Calendar. Now, there are 2 different types of OAuth. I just want you to be familiar with this. This is about the most detail I'm getting in with OAuth in this presentation. But basically, we have 3-legged OAuth, where the individual user is the resource owner. So when I say resource owner, I mean like you have your own personal Google Calendar. You're an individual user. You have the rights to grant access to that calendar. There's another type of OAuth called 2-legged OAuth. And what that's used for is when you have a resource that's owned by a company, for them to be able to grant an application access to that resource for every user within the company. So the three-legged OAuth method of OAuth is basically a web redirect flow where the individual user approves it, while the two-legged OAuth is basically an administrator goes in and gives an application access to the data. There are libraries to access all the different data APIs, so libraries in a variety of different languages, and these libraries implement some of the most common functionality. Not all the libraries implement everything, but they do implement some of the most common functionality so that you can access without understanding the raw protocol. So there's been some recent developments in the Google Data APIs, and I want to talk about a couple of those here. These are in the protocol layer of the Google Data APIs. Partial response is one of those. So if you're developing a mobile application that needs access to a user's Google Calendar data, and you only need the title of an event and maybe the time of an event, you can request just that information. Whereas previously you had to request all of the information about the event, including the attendees, where it was taking place, and that sort of thing. Similarly, we've recently launched partial updates for Google Calendar, and we'll be rolling these features out to other APIs too. And partial updates allow you to just patch a certain set of data. And we're going to show an example here shortly, but basically you can take a calendar event and just update the title and not pass the rest of the data. It makes it much more efficient to interact with the APIs. And then we've also recently announced a JSON protocol called JSON-C or Compact JSON. And it basically gives you a lot better JSON format for our APIs. We previously had a JSON format that was based in large part on Atom. It actually had all the XML namespaces in JSON, rather ugly. You probably didn't like developing against it if you're familiar with it at all. The JSON-C format is much more compact and more friendly for application developers. So speaking of applications, and application APIs. These are all the different types of applications that are part of the Google Apps suite. And all of these applications have APIs that allow you to interact with them on behalf of a user. I'm going to give you one example here with Google Calendar. Google Calendar allows you to manipulate calendars themselves. You can create, retrieve, update, and delete calendars. And you can also do the same thing with events and access control lists. You can manage what the access is to the various calendars. And you'll notice this create, retrieve, update, and delete. For those who aren't familiar with the term CRUD, it's basically using the common HTTP verbs that you see on the right-hand side there to manipulate and retrieve resources. So let's show what that looks like. Here is the Atom XML for creating a calendar event. The XML is mostly Atom here. You can see the Atom title, which says Tennis with Beth, the Atom content, meet for a quick lesson. But then you also see some areas where Google has extended the XML and added elements in its own namespace. These GD-where, GD-when, those are very specific to Google Calendar and describe where the event is taking place and when the event is taking place. After you create XML that looks like this, you can then post it to Google Calendar at a URL like that. I'm missing the authorization header here. Like I said, I'm not diving deep into how that works, but when you take this content and you post it to Google, you'll actually get a 201 created response code knowing it was successful, or hopefully get the 201 created response code. If you made a mistake, you'll get a response code in the range of 400s, etc. Here's an example of the partial update feature, which I mentioned is a new feature for the Google Data APIs. And this is showing how you can patch an entry. So let's say the event previously was for tennis with Beth. Let's say that Beth wanted to invite her friend Kate to play tennis as well. She might update the title of the event to say Tennis with Beth and Kate. Now, previously before this partial update protocol existed, every application would either have to then retrieve the full entry, modify the title, and send the full entry back. Or it would have to actually store a copy of the full entry, including all the bits of other metadata that it didn't care about. Well, with partial update, it can actually say, using that GD fields attribute up here, it can say, I'm just modifying the title. So the server will go around and delete the title from the entry and then add the title back in using the element that's provided here. So this may not look like Atom or XML. I'm including Gmail in our list of data APIs because it's another application that you can have access to. And Gmail is something special here. Gmail does have an Atom-based feed. It's a read-only feed to access a user's inbox. But Mail has common protocols that have existed for a while now. IMAP is one of those protocols. So what Google has done, and we released earlier this year, is OAuth authorized IMAP access. Because you don't want to give every application access to your username and password just because that application needs access to your mail. You can just give it access to your mail using OAuth, and it basically creates an API out of the IMAP standard that's existed for a while now. And similarly, we've done the same thing with sending email via SMTP. Now, in addition to the application APIs for accessing the user's data and manipulating things like their calendars and their contacts, we also have a series of management APIs. There are many different integration points for the management APIs. There's the provisioning API. This is perhaps one of the most common APIs. It allows you to create and delete users and things like that. We also have a calendar resources API. So if you have a bunch of resources in your organization, things like conference rooms or projectors, or maybe even special tools that your employees use for their work, you can manage them as calendar resources so that when you create a calendar event, the employees can actually add those resources and schedule them along with the event. There's the email migration API, which allows you to push email into Google Apps. There's an email settings API, which I'm going to show you an example of shortly, basically allowing you to manipulate all the settings that you're used to accessing in Gmail. A reporting API and an audit API. All the different types of enterprisey sort of APIs that you would expect to be able to manipulate data on behalf of an organization. So let's show you one example. This is the email settings API. So let's say that you have a bunch of users who are contractors. They're actually working for other companies on a regular basis, and you're storing that information in, say, your HR system. And you want to update the user's signature in their mail to let the people they're sending email to know who they're currently working for. So you can actually do that with the API. Here's an example. So Liz is a contractor. She's working in the accounts management at a particular company. Their HR system can automatically update and say, hey, she's working in accounts management. Here's her phone number. You could do similar things with promotions and all. If a user's title changes, automatically update the signature in their email. Oh, and this was actually using one of our client libraries. This is using the Python client library. It's kind of funny. I actually thought this was using the Java client library when I was reviewing the slides at one point because it looks very similar, but there's no semicolon, so it's definitely Python. All right, authentication and users. So now that we've talked about the different APIs that you can access, the different management functionality, you're probably wondering how you deal with authentication. If you work with customers that are migrating to Google Apps, or customers that have existing systems like Microsoft Exchange, etc., they probably have already an existing account system in their network. So they have something like an Active Directory server, an LDAP server, or Kerberos in their network, and they want to be able to reuse those accounts when they're using Google Apps. It's totally possible, and we'll talk about how that's done. They also likely have cloud apps. They have applications like an online payroll application, and they don't want to have users need to create new usernames and passwords for accessing those cloud apps. So they want those cloud applications to use the Google Apps accounts. So these can all work together, and let's show you how. First of all, the accounts must actually exist in Google Apps, but the passwords don't need to. So how do we get the accounts there? So if you have an on-premise system and you want to create those accounts inside Google Apps, you can use those management APIs. There are also tools available. Google has a directory sync feature, and Marco's company, Just Digital, has some tools for handling user accounts. So there are a lot of things that you can do if you don't want to use the management APIs, but the management APIs can sit underneath, in particular, the provisioning API and create those accounts. And Marcos will show you some examples of that. For the passwords, though, you can have your passwords either migrated with it, so every time the user changes their password in your Active Directory or LDAP server or Kerberos environment, you can actually synchronize those to Google Apps. But you don't have to. You can use a technology called SAML, which allows you as a company to have your own login page. And for your login page, when a user goes to log into Google Apps, Google will redirect the user to this login page that you host as a company. Now you can host this company either publicly, host this login page either publicly or behind a firewall. But basically it gives the ability for you to authenticate the user as a Google Apps customer and then assert the identity of that user to Google Apps. You're telling Google, hey, I know that this is my user John at my company. Please log him in. And Google will log him in. So you may wonder, I talked about third-party apps, these cloud applications that are out there. How do they authenticate Google Apps users? Well, they're not going to want to actually integrate with every company's behind the firewall system using something like SAML. But what they can do is use OpenID as a standard to authenticate their users. Google Apps users can then sign in with their existing account simply by clicking a button at the bottom that indicates that they have a Gmail account. And basically, the user goes to log in, the app will redirect to Google Apps, and then the apps trust Google to assert the identity. This works very much in the same way as SAML, except in a little bit different direction. Even if Google Apps doesn't know how to authenticate the user on an OpenID request, it will actually redirect over to the SAML provider and handle all of that for you. So now, Marcos, if you come up and talk about your company a little bit.
Boa tarde, meu nome é Marcos, eu trabalho com uma empresa chamada Just Digital e nós desenvolvemos uma solução chamada Just SSO que basicamente integra as suas aplicações, o seu mecanismo de autenticação interno da empresa com o Google Apps. Aqui eu vou demonstrar esse produto. Então, o primeiro desafio que a gente precisava resolver é a ideia de um ambiente de login único. Então, muitas empresas têm o seu sistema de autenticação, você chega no começo do dia, se loga na rede e a partir daquele momento você consegue acessar todos os seus sistemas. E quando você muda para o Google Apps, por padrão, você passa a ter um outro login separado, uma senha separada. Para evitar isso, é que existem essas soluções de single sign-on, a nossa é uma delas. Um outro desafio, um dos desafios que a gente procurou resolver é a questão de suporte. Porque todas essas outras soluções que existiam eram soluções dos Estados Unidos. Então tinha uma questão aí do idioma para prestar o atendimento e também a questão de fuso horário. Então atrapalhava um pouco a vida do pessoal de TI. E aí eu queria mostrar para vocês alguns dos casos de uso desse produto também. Por que ele é importante para algumas empresas. O primeiro deles, eu não sei quantos de vocês estão familiarizados com Active Directory. Mas é uma solução da Microsoft, e tem o OpenLDAP e outras, que é como se fosse uma base de dados de usuários e de recursos que a sua empresa tem. Então, é muito comum algumas empresas fazerem o quê? Ela cria os logins, os perfis dos usuários, e definir horários em que esses usuários podem fazer o acesso aos recursos da empresa. Então, por exemplo, naquela figura ali, eu cliquei no meu perfil, tem o botãozinho de horário de login, e ali você define quais são os horários que esse usuário está autorizado a acessar os recursos da empresa. Então, por exemplo, eu só estou autorizado a acessar durante o horário comercial. Eu não posso trabalhar à noite, de final de semana. Isso aqui as empresas procuram por questão de horas extras, para evitar processo trabalhista, questão legal, jurídica. Outro caso que também acontece é quando... outra situação que é comum também, o que é? É um usuário que é demitido, um funcionário que é demitido, ele é descadastrado do serviço de diretório, Active Directory, por exemplo, mas ele ainda não foi descadastrado do Google Apps. Enquanto isso não acontece, o que vai acontecer? O usuário vai conseguir ainda se logar no Google Apps, mandar e-mail, fazer tudo normalmente. Aí o administrador da rede ele teria que ir em 2 lugares para descadastrar esse usuário. Além do Active Directory, teria que entrar também no Google Apps. Agora, quando você usa a solução de Single Sign-On, o que acontece aqui? Terminou ficando, não tem a animação, mas começa o processo, o usuário acessando a página tenta acessar um recurso do Google Apps, por exemplo, o seu e-mail. Quando bate no servidor da Google, a Google vê que você tem configurado uma solução de Single Sign-On, redireciona para a URL que está configurada lá. Essa página pode estar disponível publicamente na internet ou apenas atrás do firewall, né, liberado apenas para alguns endereços IPs, por exemplo, dentro da rede da empresa. O usuário vai informar o seu login, a sua senha, aí volta essa informação para a solução de Single Sign-On. A nossa solução vai conversar com o Active Directory, ou com o OpenLDAP, ou com uma base de dados, ou um serviço, um web service, vai validar esse usuário, vai ver se o login e a senha está correto. Além disso, ele vai também verificar se essas políticas de acesso que foram configuradas estão sendo atendidas. Por exemplo, como eu disse, do horário de login, e se o usuário não está inativo, não está suspenso. Uma vez que isso tudo é satisfeito, ele é redirecionado para a página do Google, o sistema informa, olha, esse é realmente o Marcos, ele está autorizado a acessar esse recurso, e aí o usuário cai na página no recurso que ele tinha solicitado. E para usar essa solução, a solução ela é basicamente duas pernas, vamos dizer assim. Uma delas é o que o Ryan tinha acabado de comentar, que é aquele protocolo chamado Samuel, que é para fazer a comunicação. Aqui nessas flechinhas, quando eu estava falando dessas redirects, etc., em cada um desses momentos eu estou encaminhando o envelope Samuel, que é como se fosse um XML, um padrão específico para questões de segurança. Agora, outra parte é que, para fazer essa comunicação com o Google Apps e criar o usuário, ou eventualmente trocar a senha do usuário, você precisa ter habilitado o que a gente chama de provisioning em API. Por exemplo, vamos supor que você tem um usuário que está criado no AD, mas ainda não existe no Google Apps. Então, a aplicação, na hora que ela está te logando, está logando você pela primeira vez, ela vai ter que criar esse usuário lá na nuvem, para que ele tenha realmente uma caixa de e-mail. Então, a primeira coisa que você tem que fazer para usar a solução é você habilitar aqui, ticar nessa caixinha. Isso aqui o administrador do domínio tem acesso. Aqui eu vou colocar alguns exemplos de códigos para vocês. Então, aqui se vocês forem desenvolver algo parecido, tá? Por exemplo, para você, a primeira coisa, você vai criar um client, que é como uma conexão com a nuvem, você vai informar qual o e-mail de um usuário com o perfil administrativo, a senha desse usuário e qual o domínio. Aí sim você está apto a fazer as coisas, começar a mexer. Por exemplo, aqui eu estou tentando pegar um usuário, eu já estou conectado, né? E eu estou tentando obter os dados do usuário Marcos, com login Marcos. E isso retorna para mim um objeto chamado user entry. Eu posso pegar esse usuário e, por exemplo, suspendê-lo, por alguma razão. Outro exemplo aqui que a gente colocou. Como criar novos usuários, que é aquele caso que eu estava citando há pouco. Você tem um método chamado createUser, você passa o nome do usuário, o login, perdão, né, o new user ali, o nome, o sobrenome e uma senha inicial. Essa senha inicial é opcional. Aqui alguns screenshots para vocês terem ideia do que a gente está falando. Então, por exemplo, em vez daquela página tradicional de Google Apps, da caixinha de autenticação, você pode cair numa página que você customiza totalmente o layout. E depois que o usuário informa o login e senha, fui passando já. Aqui. Depois que ele informa o login e senha, você pode opcionalmente exibir uma tela de mensagem. Aqui a gente só colocou algumas opções de acesso, poderia ter outros produtos ou uma mensagem corporativa. aí sim ele acessa a caixa de e-mail dele, ou Calendar, ou Docs, o que ele tiver acessado. Aqui a página de alteração de senha. Quando você ativa a solução de single sign-on no Google Apps, no momento em que você está fazendo a configuração, que você vai indicar qual é a página de login, você também vai indicar qual é a página de alteração de senha. Como a autenticação não é mais na nuvem, o mecanismo de alteração de senha também tem que estar em outro lugar. Não faz muito sentido alterar a senha na nuvem se eu estou autenticando um Active Directory, não tem efeito nenhum. Então, você pode pegar e usar a versão padrão, que é essa tela, com login, você vai informar login e senha, confirma esse novo valor, e a gente vai atualizar isso no Active Directory. Ou então, você pode colocar aqui uma página apenas informativa, para dizer ao usuário que para ele trocar a senha, por exemplo, ele deve ir na página lá do servidor diretório, Ctrl Alt Del, por exemplo, no Windows, e alterar a senha dele. E a página de logout também. Quando você clicar naquele link de sair, ao invés de ser direcionado para uma página padrão de login, você pode estar sendo direcionado para uma página qualquer da sua empresa, ou de parceiro, enfim, do que você quiser. Acho que era isso. Tá bom?
Thank you, Marcos. So I want to talk a little bit about hosting your application. So you can host your app anywhere. So you can host your app on your servers, in the cloud, on your desktops, basically anywhere that you want to host your application. You can do that and integrate with Google Apps. You can integrate with Google Apps as a custom application, or you can launch on the Apps Marketplace, which I do have another session on later talking about the Apps Marketplace specifically, but it does not matter where you host. These APIs are open and accessible from any location. However, I wouldn't be a Googler if I didn't talk a little bit about App Engine. You can host your application on App Engine as well. App Engine has been around for a bit now and provides a way for you to build, maintain, and scale applications running either in Java or in Python. And we recently, at Google I/O this year, launched App Engine for Business, or announced App Engine for Business. This basically adds a lot of the enterprise tools to App Engine that businesses need. So auth, administration, support, SLAs. SQL is one of the primary things here. A lot of people have been asking for SQL. And basically the pricing model that we're looking at right now for this is $8 per user per month per application. So this is obviously intended for internal applications, not yet for ISVs or SaaS app developers who are selling their applications. But we are looking at the possibility of doing a similar sort of App Engine for Business for those markets as well. So in addition to hosting your full-fledged application, Google Apps also has a scripting environment, Google Apps Script, which it allows you to run your code in the cloud as server-side JavaScript. So JavaScript that actually sits and runs on Google's servers. You're not familiar with that usually with JavaScript, but AppScript is actually really powerful. This example here is showing how I oftentimes send emails to developers. If I have a list of their email addresses in a spreadsheet, I can actually add a UI element to Google Spreadsheets called Mail Merge. You see that at the bottom right here. And when I click on that element, it actually uses Google services to send emails to each of those users, all configured with this server-side JavaScript. We also, in addition to allowing your application to access the Google Apps data that's hosted in the cloud, we allow applications hosted in the cloud to access your on-premise systems as well. This is done using the secure data connector. Basically, it creates a tunnel from your application to your on-premise systems. So you can access your CRM or ERP data, and this is what that might actually look like. So this is a Google spreadsheet. The secure data connector is accessible from AppScript and accessible from App Engine, and it can actually retrieve a lot of data from your internal system. So you can see this invoice has data from the CRM app, from the product catalog, from the ERP system. A lot of different bits of data that are hooked together and integrated into the spreadsheet. Gadgets are one of the last things that we're going to talk about today as ways that you can integrate with Google Apps. And this is really taking the functionality of your UI and putting it inside Google Apps, inside Gmail, Calendar, Docs, Gmail, Calendar, Spreadsheets, and Google Sites. It's all based off a standard HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and the Open Social Standard for gadgets. Here's a few quick examples of that. This is from Atlassian's Jira Studio. It's an issue tracking application, and they allow a project manager to have up-to-date access to the issues that their software product has right from within Google Mail. It's on the left navigation. They always have easy access to that. When they click on that, it opens up the Jira Studio application. Gmail contextual gadgets are perhaps my favorite feature that's launched, so I saved it for close to the end here. Gmail contextual gadgets allow you to display a gadget from your application below an email based off the context of that email. So you can look at the email and you can say, this email is from a guy named Ryan Boyd, and this first gadget here looks Ryan Boyd up in the social networks and finds my picture, my Facebook profile, my LinkedIn profile, my Twitter profile, as well as previous messages that I've sent. And then the second contextual gadget is a more business use case where the email detects that the word timesheet was present in the email, and it basically says, hey Ryan, you need to complete your timesheet for this week, and you can enter that information in an authenticated and authorized way right from within the context of your email, drastically improving your productivity. Here's one last example of contextual gadgets, and this is from a company called Aperio. And Aperio is a consulting company, and when they receive an email from one of their customers, they can look up that customer's project information in their systems, in their internal systems and their CRM application, and provide that information right there. So in summary, you can build applications for yourself, for your company, or you can make a living building application for others or selling applications in the apps marketplace. If you want to make a living building application for others, a good way to start is becoming a reseller of Google Apps and doing integrations for customers. You can build your applications anywhere you want, and you can integrate with all sorts of components of Google Apps. Integrate with the UI, integrates with the data, integrate with the accounts, and it's not all about the cloud. Some systems are still behind the firewall, and you can still access those. If you want a more lightweight scripting environment instead of a full application, you can write scripts using Google Apps Script. So we have some resources here. I will be around here for another few minutes before I start the next session, which is on the apps marketplace. And then following that, there's a session that dives a little bit more into OpenID and OAuth and the various use cases. So thank you very much. Hope you all learned something.